Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast with me, Toby Hadoke. This one we're doing slightly differently. The story you know because you've read the blurb. It's Terror of the Autons, and it has been chosen by my special guest, Richard Marson. Back in the day, he was a writer and contributor to Doctor Who magazine. He's written books about Doctor Who, and he's also even been the editor of Blue Peter. He's Doctor Who royalty, actually, if you're a fan of my age, and he thought it would be more interesting if we chatted about his choice after we'd both watched the story. So I will watch the story without knowing what his favourite thing is, and then we'll dip forward into the future, and he'll tell me what his pick for each episode is. So we'll start, rather uncontroversially, at the beginning, with episode 1. So get yourself settled in, and we'll hear from Richard Marson, our special guest, at the end of the episode. Well, hello. I'm usually referred to as Toby Hadoke. Actually, I'm not. I'm really rarely referred to with the correct pronunciation. But that is a clue as to the episode I'm about to ask you to press play on. It is Terror of the Autons, Part 1, Episode 1. So, however you have it lined up, I hope I've bought you enough time to press play in 3, 2, 1. Well, welcome. Confession up front. This one might be a bit of a challenge for me. It's a story I've never been a massive fan of. Partially, I think it was the first Pertwee I got on bootleg video, and I was slightly disappointed to discover it was in black and white, for starters. I'd known it had only existed in black and white apart from an off-air colour, I think, but I somehow assumed that the copy I would be getting would be colour, and it wasn't. It was a very good quality black and white, but it was black and white nonetheless. So I haven't seen it in colour that much. Obviously, I have when I got the DVD, but it's not one I break out very often. The quality's okay. Actually, I sometimes expect these recoloured ones to be not so great. I think it's harder with something like the Demons, out of phase film, because we've got episode 4 and we can see the marked change in the quality between the recoloured and the actual colour. But this, it's a bit grainy, isn't it? But this is film anyway. This is John Bascombe as Rossini, who was in Poldark, the olden days one. But it's a story that I think I envisaged to be different from what we get. I always envisaged the Pertwee to be sort of lots of explosions, lots of soldiers, fewer circuses. There's quite a lot of time spent in the circus here. Fewer, factory offices. But what an entrance, and he does not disappoint. I'd always read about the Master. This is the first time I'd ever seen him, actually. Yeah. And I'd sort of got an idea of what he'd be like because I'd seen Anthony Ainley as a kid. But he is pitch perfect, and he looks fantastic. You can see why Barry Letts didn't consider anybody else for the part. Those hooded dark eyes, the way that is shot, the precise movements, the fact that he can click his fingers through leather gloves. I wonder if that was on Roger Delgado's CV. And the economy of this, that's not even a set. That's Dave Carter, perennial walk-on. He'd been Silurian in the size. He's done loads, Dave Carter. Never found him. It's hard. He's called Dave Carter. If you live next door to a bloke called Dave who says, I was in Doctor Who loads, please let me know. But the economy of that, bit of CSO, that's what that set was, a walk-on to go, oi, or whatever, smash a thing, grab the sphere. So great, the story's underway. I was trying to set up at the beginning. I know this is about accentuating the positive, but I'm just trying to explain why it will be uphill for me. I still intend to do it, and I still love Doctor Who. but I'm coming from a point where this was not the story I wanted it to be. I'd got the Target book with the amazing, one-eyed octopus crab thing on the front. I'd read about the House of Lords complaining, and the papers and the BBC upper echelon saying it was too scary, and it was, as I say, it was quite sort of garish and jolly and not what I expected. However, I'm not a potential. I think when I was younger, I wanted to be grizzled and cynical, and I liked my Doctor Who. I can understand why this is a real sort of culture shift from season 7, which was how I wanted my Doctor Who, and I can understand why the production team went away from that. Terence Dix always said that season 7, was gritty and brilliant and looked good, but it wasn't Doctor Who. It was more like Quatermass, and I like Quatermass. Whereas this is more like Doctor Who, and it's hard to disagree, actually. Although I love season 7, I could have done with another 5 years of season 7. She's great, isn't she, Katie Manning? And what we forget, I think, because she is so Jo Grant, is that in real life, I know Katie is manic and scatty and eccentric, but she's not Jo Grant. She doesn't even sound like Jo Grant. She puts on her voices, and she... this is a characterization, very much so. Maybe when we do The Curse of Peladon, I will talk about the Doctor Who and the Monsters repeat that led to me writing TH4KM on my school exercise book, because she's very easy to fall in love with. That's a nice shot through the thing. Oh, we've had it. I'm so sorry. I talked through one of the great bizarre lines of Doctor Who, which is when he calls her a ham-fisted bun vendor. For years I was going, what's a bum bender? What's a bum bender? Is it some sort of... I've heard the Third Doctor say things like jackanapes and that sort of thing. So I thought bun bender was perhaps some sort of ancient insult. But with that, I knew it wouldn't be rude. I knew it wasn't bum or in the pejorative bender, which has been used as a horrible pejorative in the past. I didn't know that was a special effect, the double, until really recently. Somebody pointed it out to me that the double radar is an effect shot. Very subtle, very effective, and this location's actually gorgeous. And these stairs and gantries give us, a feeling of height. It gives us, gets us outside, and the location, that's actually gorgeous. I love that. See, I wouldn't have noticed stuff like that as a kid watching in black and white, how much that took us away from, people talking in offices, which this is, but it's slightly different. And these two are both Barry Letts regulars. Christopher Burgess has been in Enemy of the World and is in Planet of the Spiders. And Andrew Staines was actually Barry Letts' nephew, the bald guy with the beard, who was also an Enemy of the World at the last minute, taking over from... Should I do this fact now or when I do Enemy of the World? I'll do it when I do Enemy of the World. And I'm not going to do this very often, and I don't actually have much from Doctor Who. I don't have a prop from Doctor Who. I don't have a full script from... I have got the K. Patrick scripts from the Savages now. But I don't have anything that's been on screen in Doctor Who. But Andrew Staines, who's about to get killed, I had the pleasure of interviewing, and I interviewed him when he was with Terence Lodge, who he's also, because both of these guys are part of Lupton's gang in Planet of the Spiders, as is the actor Terence Lodge. And Terence introduced me to Andrew and said, "Oh, you're talking to a very fine draftsman, And Andrew said, "Oh yes, I sketched Roger Delgado learning his lines." And later, Andrew actually sent me that. So for those of you listening to the podcast, maybe I'll put this in the show notes or something. I'm showing the videocast people. This is available as videocast. The sketch, and it says, An actor prepares, this is in Andrew's handwriting, the late Roger Delgado studies his words for Terror of the Autons in the BBC rehearsal rooms, North Acton, Sept. October 1970. This was the first Doctor Who story in which he played the Master, signed Andrew Staines. And Andrew actually gave that to me. Andrew is no longer with us, so I'm very fortunate to have that, and I got it framed up, and I think it's my most treasured Doctor Who thing, just because it's a one-off, and it's a little, I know it's not a photograph, but it's a little taste of history, and it was done, when this was being made, and I think that's rather special. And Andrew was a very nice man who he pronounced it nepotism. But he said he quite often filled in for Barry, because he's in Carnival of Monsters as well as the captain of the ship. He quite often filled in at the last minute if Barry was short of somebody or if somebody dropped out. His mother Pauline Letts. Barry Letts' sister was an actress. But I really like Christopher Burgess, this actor, who's got white hair in Enemy of the World. He's sort of aged up a bit, which he wouldn't really do now, but he's got a lovely sort of broken quality about him. His voice almost feels like it's about to crack. And this is the sort of the Brigadier and the Doctor here, sort of jousting, but very good-naturedly. Doctor being rather stroppy. He's a bit of a meanie, but it's deliberate. But it's rebranding, as you like, if you like the series, with this, some have said slightly cozier feel. But that's partly dictated by the rapport of the actors. Nicholas Courtney is obviously just lovely as the Brigadier, and he knows how to play the Doctor, which is nice. And yes, it is a bit less sort of Euston Filmsy gritty stuff, but Doctor Who is a show that is designed to be fun for kids, and as we know, there are various elements of this that were deemed unsuitable for kids. So perhaps a spoonful of Dayglow helps the strangulations go down. Ooh, that was torturous. I'm so sorry. And because we get Yates and Benton later, and we've got the Master, and that's it. That's the unit family, and of course you get this beautiful high shot here because you've got a big tower in your radar place. But yes, interesting. Quite a muted introduction for Yates, seeing as he's going to go on to be a regular. But I quite like it sometimes when Doctor isn't aware of its own sort of legacy and go, this is a big moment. I know Captain Yates, but he's a regular. He's a companion. Or is he? I don't know. Yeah, he is. He's a regular. Frank Mills, still about, 93. Lives not far from here, I think. I remember he's one of those actors that you look at and think, I know him from somewhere. He's been in everything, but actually had a sort of better later career. I think he's an extra in Quatermass and the Pit. But was Betty Turpin's husband in Coronation Street, and I know he auditioned for the Forsyte Saga, the remake, on the day that I did, because they were seeing the Manchester actors, and Jeff Hinsliff was up for the same part as Frank Mills, I think. Not the part I was up for. I got it. I don't think either of them did, but they were seeing all the Manchester actors in one day, because that's what happens. They do 3 weeks of auditions in London, then go, let's throw a bone to the Manchester people. We could spare them 12 hours. I adore David Garth, Solicitor Grey from the Highlanders, returning to Doctor Who as the bowler-hatted Time Lord. This is Robert Holmes already going, berobed, invincible, godlike people. Nah, nuts to that. I'll make him a slightly fruity, patronising city gent. David Garth is perfectly cast and plays the part to a T. I can understand why, fans at the time maybe who'd seen the Time Lords once, they were big news. The Doctor is from the Time Lords, and they're these amazing, scary, godlike people in robes with starry eyes who could create force fields. And a year and a bit later, no, they're pompous civil servants. But I like what Robert Holmes does with Doctor Who. He makes it slightly more than science fiction. And austere and berobed can only take you a certain way, and I think what sums up Doctor Who is that actually, where a lot of programs would make people austere and berobed, Doctor Who makes them bowler hatted, and that is sort of comforting, yet also satirical, yet also a cheeky Mickey take. Much more fun for the actor. Good umbrella acting there, David Garth. And I think that's what makes it Doctor Who. So whilst I'm sure if I'd been a kid of 7 or 8 in 1969 when the War Games was on and I watched this, I would be furious. We Doctor Who fans do furious, especially when the programme with the flexible format flexes its format. But I love this now. And I think this is a terrific scene, and the fact that Pertwee is so good at being pissed off. Oh, good wind as well, I have to say, because this is a set, obviously. Oh, good luck. I think that's terrific. And that's a sort of, that's a parallel of the Pertwee Doctor bumping heads with civil servants on Earth, which he will do for the rest of his career, pretty much. In fact, we get one in episode 3 here. So in a way, that's a neat foreshadowing of what he's going to have to do. And we're getting the Doctor to use his skills fairly early on, which is nice. He's a natural Pertwee. I think he fits the part like a glove and does all this stuff like it's second nature, which for somebody who was unsure of himself, I know there was a feeling he was slightly intimidated by Roger Delgado, wasn't he? Because Delgado had much more experience as a television actor and as a straight actor. Pertwee hadn't really done an awful lot of electronic studio drama acting before he was Doctor Who, if any. And I think, was not as confident as he might have appeared. So it's to his credit that he is a Doctor of extreme confidence, who just looks brilliant. But yeah, Frank Mills, here he is. I remember seeing him turn up in sort of Casualty and things sort of much after I'd even sort of been collecting this. I was surprised he was sort of still about and still doing stuff. But he started acting, I think, quite late. But yep, still going at 93, somewhere around here. His part in Coronation Street was slightly odd because he was sort of introduced to marry Betty Turpin, but then he was sort of more of a sort of off-screen. And this shot of Andrew Staines took ages and is really well done, and it's a great way of establishing the Master. It's good, it is. And the shadow there is good because it wouldn't look so realistic without the shadow. I think the shadow was done with a cardboard cutout. But that shot took a couple of hours. That's it, so in its infancy. But I think it's terrific and much better than a doll that they used subsequently. But obviously it doesn't take as long. And I think that's a great Doctor Who moment. So we're doing all right so far, aren't we, for a story that I was going to be slightly underwhelmed by. It's also slightly different, this, because I'm going to have to choose my things as we go through, but I'm then not going to know what the person that sent me this story, Richard Marson, has done until tomorrow in my time, because we're going to do it on Zoom. So I'm going to write down what I choose for each episode as my favourite thing so that I don't cheat, and then we'll see whether Richard and I have come up with the same things. I'm not used to this in colour at all. I watched this in black and white so many times. I think I've probably seen it in colour once, maybe twice. That's not very often for me for a Doctor Who story. I didn't say I passed. Very nice. I do like the fact the Doctor's got a space apron. Silver was a good shorthand for space, wasn't it? I think I'm sure there are even some silver cushions on Gallifrey at some point. How do we make this ordinary thing look like it is from space or the future? Silver, we don't have that these days. but yeah, the this I think I expected Pertwee Doctor Who to look much more like a movie, just because of the way it was written up. I think I expected it to be darker. All of these inventive deaths in this are actually quite comic strippy, and I don't mean that as a pejorative, but I think my taste, as I say, my taste as a youngster was always for Doctor Who to be as grown up as possible, which is interesting because as I get older, and I have a couple of kids now who are in teens. Well, now one is 20, and I was desperate for them to retain their childhoods for as long as possible, because actually being as kid, and I struggled in my childhood a lot, for various reasons I'm not going to bore you with, but also there was all that unfettered joy and innocence and all of those things that we do lose and that get eroded over time. And I was desperate for my kids sometimes when they wanted to be all grown up to sort of enjoy being a kid for as long as possible, because in many ways it doesn't get better than that. And I think I spent a lot of my childhood because I've got older brothers and sisters, waiting for that time when life got sorted, when you got grown up and you knew everything and you didn't have to worry about anything. And of course, none of that's true. So actually, I connect a lot more with Doctor Who that's a bit more kid-friendly now, I think, because it reminds me that of those things that I think sometimes as a kid you don't realise are the best days of your life in many ways. I always like Doctor Who when it goes on location, just little things like those rows of pipes and the size of the set, as it were, because we're outside. Benefits from being on location, and this is great. Joe Grant, Kate, oh hello, and he's got such a good face. And I remember reading an interview with Katie Manning where she said she had to be hypnotised by the Master, and when he was off camera he pulled lots of faces at her to make her giggle. Although it must be this bit, because it was too far away from her before, because she can't see a blooming thing. Ha 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 ha! Because Katie Manning is as blind as a bat. And Michael Wisher, who I mates with Barry Letts. Michael Wisher, the first Davros, but he'd been in Ambassadors of Death 2 stories ago with a beard. So I suppose shave your beard off, you can have another part 2 stories later. Those were the days. And Benton. So now we have the 5 regulars. The unit family is in place. Harry Taub. Both of his Doctor Who appearances, because he was a very recognisable actor, Harry Taub, and also an Irishman, fanzine, what I read many years ago, that said he'd got a terrible Irish accent. And I was very heartened when Harry Taub passed away. I think The Independent or The Guardian called him one of the finest character actors of his generation, something like that. And it was nice to see him get that sort of recognition, because very good character actor, great career on stage and on screen. And yet his Doctor Who's are both sort of, let's get the famous guy in and then kill him off, surprisingly, because he's in episode 1 of The Seeds of Death. And he gets a guest billing in the Radio Times, and he's dead within about 10 minutes. And I mean, at least he makes it to episode 2 here, and he's in the tribute to Roger Delgado as well on the is it the Frontier in Space DVD, and wrote a lovely letter, I know, to the guys involved in the making of the DVD, just saying thanks for the DVD and stuff like that. So proper gent. And this is the bit where he does the phone call and wraps his and you've got his tapping finger. I really like this touch. Barry Letts isn't the most dynamic of directors, I don't think. But I love that moment. I think that's it's just a way of just making it a bit more interesting. Now, yes, we needed to see an Auton because it is called Terror of the Autons, and I think one of the things I felt as a kid was that I didn't see enough of them. They do like their CSO backdrops, don't they? Which is, they're learning how to, they're breaking in the technology, and being 100% convincing wasn't necessarily the order of the day. I think there was a tacit acknowledgement that you were suggesting something rather than entirely pulling it off. You can always see the fringing on the CSO, but the CSO sort of blow up backdrop walls didn't last that long. Stopper That's a Bomb, I think, had to be added a bit later because it's not entirely clear what the smoking box is. But there we go. I'm perfectly happy with that. I'm pleased to. I remember being astonished and rather chuffed that Delgado is so high up on the credits. I mean, he really is a regular. He's not, not just the good guys, then the bad guys. I was quite surprised to see Katie Manning so low down. She goes further up as the era progresses, and the Brigadier and Yates and Benton drop right to the bottom. Right to the bottom. Anyway, you don't care about that. It's only me who gives some monkeys about credit order. I've done a whole podcast on that. Anyway, I've got to choose my favourite thing because I'm about to leap in. No director credit on this, is there? Because it's Barry Letts is the producer and the director. So that's the end of episode 1. I'm going to pause it. Ready to watch episode 2, which I am going to do shortly. It'll be another episode for you. However, normally now I would play what my special guest has chosen as their favourite thing. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to nominate mine. I'm going to write it on this piece of paper so I cannot cheat. And then when I speak to them for me tomorrow, but I'll play for you imminently, they'll tell me what their favourite thing is, and we'll see if what I've written down matches with them. And if it does, I win, and if it doesn't, I lose. And the difference between winning and losing is not entirely clear. But let's add some drama to it. I am going to choose, I think it's pretty, with honourable mention to that brilliant CSO shot of Googe, which obviously has a slight personal connection for me. I think because it sums up to me so much of what Doctor Who is about, because it probably would have annoyed me if I'd been a fan at the day, and yet I have to accept that I think it's really great now. And it never did annoy me, but that's because I'm younger. But I'm sure there are similar things that have happened that sort of upended my view of what Doctor Who was because of the way the show evolves, that I've been furious about. So I don't distance myself from anybody that was annoyed with it, because I'm cut from the same cloth. However, I love it. I think it's very Robert Holmes. I think it's very Doctor Who, and that is the bowler-hatted Time Lord. Not just the performance from David Garth, which I think is very good, because I have to be careful not to just go, I like that actor and that performance, because they're very much the things that I fixate upon. It's the whole concept of what he's done with the Time Lord there, the whole interaction with the Doctor, as well as the performance. So the bowler-hatted Time Lord is my favourite thing for episode 1. I'm now going to cut to the future, where I will talk to Richard Marson and see what he says. Well, I had a brainwave in that I thought I'd contact for this, not just people that I sit in the pub with and wax lyrical about Doctor Who to, but the very people that created the monster you see before you now, the people that wrote the history that I gorged on as a child. So I'm delighted. I have met this gentleman before and had a very nice time when I've done so, but we don't talk that often, although always very helpful when it comes to sharing resources or making contacts, which is a really important part of the stuff that we do, and is, I think, sometimes underreported. So I'm very grateful to Richard Marson for a number of reasons. Hello, Richard. How are you?
Hello, Toby. I'm really good, thank you. In these strange times, I have not many complaints. So there you go.
And tell me why I would just for the viewer, because some of them, we've got some very young ones. I think I don't know, I haven't launched the podcast yet, but just so that it comes from your mouth, your sort of history with Doctor Who.
So many years ago, when I was only a teenager, I had the great good fortune to start writing for Doctor Who magazine, Doctor Who Monthly, as it was then. So it had a crummy office in Queensway, and was very much a labour of love for the people who did it. And incredibly, I kind of blagged my way in. And for 4 years, while I was also in full-time education, I was writing articles, doing interviews. And I think what often gets forgotten is that was the pre-internet era. So in terms of finding out stuff and doing any kind of research, it was much harder work. But the great advantage we did have was that, of course, most of those people from the classic era of Doctor Who were still alive, and they might be very surprised that you wanted to talk to them, but they were still working. They were still, in some cases, in their prime. So that was an enormous privilege, you know. And I look back now and I think, oh, I wish I'd done more. I wish I'd, you know, kind of tracked even more people down. But it was an incredible time. And from there, you know, I then worked in television and never lost my love of Doctor Who. But while I was on Blue Peter, I was running Blue Peter for a number of years, at the point where Doctor Who came back spectacularly and very successfully. And it was great to be part of doing the promotion. So we did the famous designer monster competition. Whatever you think of Love and Monsters,
I love
that
Love and
is
Monsters.
also a same here. And it's a tribute to the kind of sibling relationship between Doctor Who and Blue Peter, which was lovely to be able to continue to foster that and continue to develop that. And I've also written a couple of Doctor Who related books. One was the biography of John Nathan Turner, which caused a bit of a hoo-ha a few years ago. Happily, I think Perspective has now allowed to be in the building, along with Hoo-Ha. And then I did a biography of Verity Lambert, which was really, you know, a kind of fascinating, because I knew much less about Verity. And of course, she had an incredible varied career. So that really was a fascinating process. So those are my credentials. And
I like it.
that's why I'm here. But of course,
I want you
I was just going to say, like you, Toby, I was that kind of, I remember listening to your initial show when it was on Radio 4 and just kind of nodding like a nodding dog. I think I was in the car going somewhere and just thinking there was so much kind of empathy for the things you were describing. And the thing that, you know, when you're a first Doctor Who fan, again in the pre-internet era, we were slightly other in that most of our families and friends didn't really get in any way why we loved this program. And so you had to seek out the people who got where you were coming from and understood why it had somehow managed to root itself in your heart. So there you are.
Oh, well, bless you. Well, and I would like you to write a history of Doctor Who, actually, called Perspective and Hoo-Ha, because I think I think that's pretty much Doctor Who fandom in a nutshell, isn't it? Perspective and Hoo-Ha. Well, look, you have chosen a story. I've chosen one thing from each episode and a bonus thing that I like about it, and I'm going to see if we tally. But the viewer does not yet know which story you've chosen. So without going into specifics, tell us the story that you've chosen and a sort of vague reason why.
Okay, I've gone for Terror of the Autons, the first story of the 1971 season of Doctor Who. And the reason for that is it's really my first memory of the programme. And the reason it took root in my memory, I think, was it terrified me so completely. I mean, I couldn't tear myself away, but equally I was really genuinely freaked out by it. And those memories, which were very visceral, stayed with me, you know, ever afterwards. And it was also the beginning of my kind of personal dream team of Doctor Who, John Pertwee, Katie Manning, and the kind of unit guys. So for me, it's the beginning of a lot of things.
Lovely. Well, episode 1. Now, listen, I have a confession to make. This was a tricky one for me because it was the first Pertwee I sort of collected on bootleg, and having had my imagination fired up by the Target books and the movies they created in our heads, and the fact that it was in black and white, it was a massive disappointment to me. And it took me ages to recover from that. So this has been a very useful process. To sort of go into it with fresh eyes, and I did thoroughly enjoy it. I'm pleased to say, but I had to get that confession out of the way, and I've chosen my thing for episode 1. But I'll be interested, and I've written it down so that I can't cheat. But so what's your choice for episode 1, Richard?
Well, I mean, it sounds kind of obvious, but for me, it's the first meeting of Katie Manning's Joe Grant with the Doctor when she comes in and ruins his experiment by using the fire extinguisher. I think, partly it's because of the charm of it, that I think it's very tough for a young actor to join any series. And obviously, Katie Manning was, I guess, in her early 20s. And, to make such impact straight away, to be someone who has so much immediate effect on the viewer, I think that's no mean feat. She doesn't always get the credit for it. And, John Pertwee was clearly an established scene stealer and very domineering leading man. So she needed to be able to quickly carve out her own niche and her own place in the proceedings, which she does with so much charm right from the off. And so that's why I thought, for me, that was the moment.
I think that's a good choice. And I think Katie, and I did mention it in my commentary, I think we sometimes forget as well that Katie is acting, because Joe is such a great creation, and because Katie is bonkers in the best sense. We sort of go, oh, well, they're sort of the same, but actually they're not. And even their vocal register is totally different. It's a proper acting performance. But I think I'm always in danger, I think, of when I'm doing this, of overlooking the regulars. So I thought you were going to also say perhaps the arrival of the Master, which is another great scene. But I've gone I've ignored the regulars, which I must make a mental note not to do, although it would be boring if every time I just went Patrick Troughton, whatever. But I chose the bowler-hatted Time Lords. I don't know if you see the mirror or whether I'm the right way around. Just because, but interesting. Part of that choice, I added the caveat, and you will be able to give proper perspective on this, that if you've just been introduced to the Time Lords in the War Games as the Doctor's people, and they're these austere, good, godlike figures, was there not a certain amount of sort of disappointment that the next time you see them, that majesty has been completely sort of undercut and satirized by pesky Robert Holmes?
Well, it's funny you should say that, Toby, because I always think that moment's a bit shonky. And I don't know that I truly can say that I thought that at the age of 5 when I first saw it, because I think my 5-year-old impression of Terror of the Autons is of lurid colour and visceral horror. So I think it was more a kind of gut reaction to the images. And actually, even now, for something that's nearly 50 years old, I think it moves along at quite a rattle if you compare it to other things at that time. It's very, very comic strip in a lot of ways, which if you're 5, actually works really well, because you're not analysing the plot, you're not overthinking it, you're just swept up in this kind of tidal wave of one set piece after another, and your safety valve are the Doctor and Joe and the Brigadier, and they work really well. So I think the shonky Time Lord cropping up on the dodgy CSO probably went like that. And when I watch it now, I do think this is a little bit of an in joke going on somewhere with Barry Letson and maybe an actor mate. I don't know if it was an actor mate of his, but that's how it feels now as an adult.
So in effect, I've managed to choose the one thing you really don't like about it. This could be interesting. So, okie dokie.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
Well, more of a clarification, really, because I got distracted and sidetracked when discussing the Doctor's insult to Joe after she has ruined his experiment. And yes, I know he wasn't calling her a bum bender, although that's quite the playground insult. I do discuss this during the next episode where I pick up the thread, but I didn't want to leave it hanging lest I get a barrage of Twitter I think you'll find. I know the line is, "You ham-fisted bun vendor," which basically means you cack-handed seller of cakes, which is, as insults go, I suspect verging into the realms of the unique. But what a line to conjure. You ham-fisted bun vendor. More on that next week, but just some clarification that I do know what the actual line is. Richard's good, isn't he? There's more from him next time. Okay, so that was Richard Marson. As I record this, I've got no idea what we've just said to each other, because that's happening tomorrow. But I'm going to wibbly wobbly off into time and space, and I hope that whatever Richard and I did was suitably climactic and satisfying. I am going to soon watch episode 2, which will be the next episode of this, but for this particular installment, stop me, that's a bomb. That's a wrap. Thanks very much. Ta-ta. Some sad news since I recorded that commentary and eulogised that veteran actor Frank Mills, who plays the radio telescope director. Frank has sadly passed away at the age of 93, so what an excellent innings he had, including being an extra in Quatermass and the Pit, but he was in almost everything, including, as I think I mentioned in the commentary, playing Betty's husband in Coronation Street for a couple of years. So we salute you, Frank, as you go to the great green room in the sky. It's also worth mentioning, as I'm recording an addendum thing here, that Terror of the Autons can now be enjoyed on the BBC Season 8 Blu-ray, where it has extra new special effects and has been given a little bit of polish. So I'll probably go and watch it again now. Welcome. It's Toby Hadoke. Or is this just a plastic mask? No, it's me. It's episode 2 of Terror of the Autons. So I want you to press play in 3, 2, 1, go. I paused at the end of episode 1. Here we go. Episode 2. I'm not sure we're ever quite going to marry up. I'd love to get some form of consistency with that. But these things take so long to do anyway. It's not the setting up of the cameras, which does take a while, the editing afterwards. Well, I don't, edit any of the talk, but just the putting it all together. It's the fact that I've just spent 15 minutes trying to find the pen, which I had, which fell on the floor, and then I moved so I could have it for episode. So I've got a new pen and put it here. I'm ham-fisted. I never actually finished explaining about ham-fisted bun vendor. I said that as I remember saying it as I think to my partner that it was a fun. I called her one as a joke, and she said, "What does that actually mean?" And why did Doctor Who use the word? That sequence of words. I do like the fact that Unit's in a castle, and that nice moment of the bomb and the explosion. But yeah, ham-fisted bun vendor is, of course, he thinks she's the tea lady. So presumably. Well, I don't know if vendor means that you exchange token, or if it just means giving out. So otherwise, is she charging for the cakes? But perhaps vendor. I thought vend it suggested a certain exchange of money. But anyway, bun vendor, seller, purveyor of iced cakes, buns, whatever. Ham-fisted, because she's ruined his experiment, gives you ham-fisted bun vendor. I like Robert Holmes's dialogue, but I think that one's quite. I think that is a unique combination of words that you would never find in any other circumstance. Schizoid dissociation, however, that sounds pretty plausible to me to explain Joe's hypnotized state. And I quite like her sort of unblinking catatonia. Yes, she blinks a little bit, but deliberately, very slowly. And I remember reading an interview with Robert Holmes where he said he'd basically invented McDermott just to kill him off. So I have to say, when I started, I think I read the novel first. When McDermott arrived, I knew he was toast. But no, that's interesting, because I remember when it was in black and white, I was never quite sure what colour the chair was, or sort of quite what it looked like. And I do think I wonder if it's partially to do with the quality as well. It does have a strange sort of amorphousness about it, and it's a pretty grotty looking thing, but the sadism of the idea of, you know, everyday objects, particularly of sort of plastic tat becoming murderous, is a very gloriously Doctor Who thing. And I like having McDermott with the Irish accent saying it looks like a black pudding, and you know, you won't say I'll tell you that for nothing, and his reaction to the fact that the plastic is cold and clammy is I like all of that. I believe all of that. Harry Taub's great. In a story that isn't sort of famed for it's not got many memorable characters or actors in it, really. I think that's another reason I thought I would struggle with it, because there's not an awful lot to say about many of the characters or the cast. Everyone's sort of in and out rather than Michael Wisher. But it's not. I don't think it's his finest hour. He's such a great servant to Doctor Who, that we sort of talk about his other parts more. That's pretty grim, and the sort of the fact you can see the hand, and that's, I mean, it's done backwards, isn't it? So only stops breathing there. So that's quite clever, especially as it's done backwards. Now this is a glorious line about termination of employment, and he does sort of regard the corpse of his old boss with a certain, I don't know, it's very effective. He's not his old boss, but his old works manager, but it's quite out of character for Rex Farrell, who spends much of the rest of this being a gibbering scaredy pants. I remember that clip being on the beginning of Resistance is Useless, the documentary they showed before a repeat season when I was at college, and I recorded it. Sorry, I've just remembered I forgot to do the claps at the beginning, which helped me to line it up for the editing. That's another thing that's going to take time. It's the change of Joe from Liz is another. I love Liz Shaw, but you can see that why they had elected for a Joe type character instead. Having Liz there to fulfill, you know, when there's crossover with the Doctor, that doesn't necessarily really help with the companion. So Barry Litz's instincts as a producer were very sharp, and of course, you know, this is his period of him and Terence Dix as producer and script editor produces a pretty consistent run on the show, I would say. Stephen Jack, who was in Treasure Island with Patrick Troughton in the film, but was largely a voice man. I think, in fact, he was a fellow of the Royal Society, because he wasn't just a voice man. I think he worked a lot with voice and language. That's a nice line, isn't it? About he sat in his chair and just slipped away. But yes, Stephen Jack and his son, who's just passed away of coronavirus as I record this in lockdown, which is one of the reasons behind the whole commentary podcast thing. Andrew Jack, who was Stephen Jack's son, was a dialect coach. He was Karen Gillan's dialect coach on Guardians of the Galaxy, but he did all the big movies, Lord of the Rings, look him up. And he was the son of Stephen Jack. So obviously there's something in the genes about how they understood language and dialect. And yeah, Stephen Jack was a prolific radio actor. So, you know, an interesting story he has to tell. Sad that Andrew Jack passed away due to this vicious thing that has us in our grip. I like that the Master's tie and pocket square are gold. That's amazing. And yet it still looks elegant on him. Black and gold. It works. Yeah, Rex Farrell's a tricky character because he is a bit pathetic, and I think Michael Wisher is a terrific actor. But Yeah. I'm accentuating the positive. I'm accentuating the positive. And it's nice this early on that we have in Farrell Senior somebody who can resist the Master, because otherwise it just makes it all too easy for the Master if he can just go around with his theme tune, intimidating everybody. It's great that he's got a theme tune, and it's a wonderful piece of music. And this is a bit. This always reminds me a bit of the Seeds of Death, where water, isn't it? Water defeats the seeds. Here, you need a certain circumstance of temperature and or weather to make the baddie prosper. In this case, it's the heat that activates the troll doll. And it's weird because looking at that, you sort of go, what's the appeal of that? I totally don't understand. And then I remembered when I was younger, trolls, when I was about 8 or 9, there were these Danish troll dolls, but the appeal of them was the hair, and they were sort of cute little sort of elfin things, but they had different sort of hairs, and you styled them with your hair, and you collected them, and I had one. And lots of people, there were all those sorts of little crazes that you had when you were kids. I remember there was what were those bags of water that were, what were they called? And we had to give those back because apparently the water in them was bad or something, but they were a craze. There were various different crazes. And so I can see why. I think that doll is pretty horrible, but it says in the script it's a pretty horrible looking thing. Yeah. It's pretty grotesque. And of course it's quite big as well. Oh, Brigadier. And yes, the Brigadier unit have different military costumes. I think they work much better. Again, Barry Letts' instincts are right. I could see why they gave them different costumes for the invasion and for season 7, but Barry Letts rang the army and said what would they wear, and they said pretty much what the army wear, except they would have blue epaulets, so they're called, and berets, but blue, of course, would have made CSO impossible. So and we know how Barry Letts likes his CSO, so he vetoed that. But I know Nicholas Courtney preferred having this more sort of standard military costume and hadn't liked the Bobby Bartlett design, which had premiered with the invasion. And I think that makes it a bit more realistic, a bit more grounded. And I think that the colours just work slightly better. Did you... Easy love. That's not the way to chat up a lady, Captain Yates. No, so they were, you know, it's interesting to see, because we know that there was... You're acting like one. That's Captain Yates. It's interesting sort of seeing this where they're going, shall we have a love interest between Captain Yates and Joe Grant? And then after not very long they go, yeah, I don't think we're quite gonna suggest that they're interested in each other. And I remember reading about Mike Yates, and Mike was quite a tough name when I was younger. Tough guys in tough things were called things like Mike and Ian. I remember my friend Peter Sato, who's a brilliant character comedian, did a character called Mike Adams, and it was exactly that sort of 70s kind of, I've got a hairy chest and I wear brute and I've got a chain and I talk like this and I'm Mike, I'm a tough guy. And I sort of imagined Mike Yates being a sort of captain who was a bit rough and tumble. So I was quite surprised that... and he's not the only one. Captain Turner in The Invasion is very jolly. The sort of... I think it hadn't perhaps imprinted upon me that officers... You know, an officer was tended to be a sort of an upper class person, so that sort of that jolliness it goes hand in hand with that, and you know, if you're doing TV shorthand, you know, the captain therefore is a bit sort of jolly, whereas the non-commissioned ranks are sort of more the sort of tough guys. But it is a bit of a culture shock when you're expecting sort of grizzled military ease, if you like, when you actually get a sort of cheery Boy Scout who probably doesn't fancy Joe Grant. And it's weird because I don't... The circus stuff, I don't think really landed with me when I first watched this, but it is a novel setting for a Doctor Who, and that, I mean, one does have disquiet now about how performing as animals were treated, and probably wouldn't want to think too hard about that. Although, seeing elephants in the Ark, they've got an elephant, haven't they? And it's like, wow, this is amazing. So there's 3 elephants, there are 4 elephants. Is that the most elephants ever in Doctor Who? I think 5 elephants. This is the elephants. I love the fact Joe's stashed herself in the back of the car. And that's John Pertwee's mate, isn't it? Bobby Roberts with his glittery jacket, who was the circus guy. I love the fact that John Pertwee knew people at the circus. I know somebody who's got a hovercraft, or whatever. I think John Pertwee knew a lot of people. Shall I water ski? But the circus setting, actually, and the circus is a good... So I'd like to perhaps see more of it, because, malevolent clowns is a very Doctor Who thing, isn't it? And the fact that the circus lot here, they sort of form a bit of a pitchfork mob a bit later on, which I'm not sure shows circus folk in the best light. But I think they could have perhaps done more to, invert the sort of jollity of the circus and turn it grotesque. But I suppose they're too busy so busy turning everyday objects grotesque. This is more of a just a more interesting backdrop, perhaps, than your normal than your normal base or whatever, and that's the function that it serves. But it does mean we get a setting we're not quite used to. But again, they're not an awful lot of Autons. Roy Stewart, though, it's Toberman. Toberman from Tomb of the Cybermen, who, having had a pretty decent part of a strong, silent man, Roy Stewart, who ran a gym. I think he ran a restaurant as well. It was weird because I don't think he ever did any... When Tomb came back, they got most of the cast together. And they didn't get Roy Stewart. I don't know why. And yet he was around for a lot longer. He's no longer with us. But as far as I know, was never interviewed. And he's great in Tomb of the Cybermen. Sadly, he doesn't get to do an awful lot in this, and it is a bit of a sort of stereotypical thing going on. Rossini is horrible. I mean, yeah, Tony does it. Tony, the strongman, doesn't even say anything. But I wonder how they sold it to the Roberts brothers as well. Will you have your circus in? Bobby, will you have your... I can't do impressions, but that's my John Pertwee. Could you have your circus in Doctor Who? Yeah. What are you going to do with... How are you going to show the circus? We're going to show you as largely unpleasant people who are slightly crooked, drink and smoke, avaricious, prone to pitchfork mob rule. But yeah, and so I think, yeah, what's the positives here? I think John Bascom's great as Rossini. I do like the gentlemen don't talk about money. They don't talk about... Gentlemen rarely talk about anything else. Is that from something else? I think it probably is. And it isn't me. Yeah, I'd forgotten actually what a sort of thug he is. And they have actually the sparring between the two of them, the verbal spar between Rossini and the Doctor is rather fun. It's entertaining second string villainy. And Jo is so game, isn't she? She's stowed into the back of the car. She's rung the Brigadier and said, "The Doctor's here, but I'm not waiting, Brigadier. I'm going to go and help." Yes, here's poor old Christopher Burgess, the professor. Christopher Burgess was at drama school with Bernard Kay, my friend. Christopher Burgess, actually, he was at drama school with Bernard Kay and Maurice Perry and Rex Robinson. All of them Doctor Who types. I think they're all at the all at the Old Vic Drama School together. if not all in the same year, but they might well have been. It's beyond me. Yeah. And of course, this is one of the insidious. It's John Pertwee's Yeti on the loo in Tooting Bec, isn't it? Take something ordinary. Tommy Reynolds is the diminutive actor here, who'd already been one of the Chumbleys in Galaxy 4. That's effective. That works. Mrs. Farrell's CSO kitchen, but it's and actually, yeah, I do like the favouring of the feet for the sort of death kicks. That's pretty grim. So we've had the McDermott's tapping hand on the phone, episode 1, and then the death kick, which I think is pretty, because seeing a sort of post-death or during the sort of nerve reflex or muscle reflex is a pretty grim sort of, because it's a sort of it's like, it's a sort of cadaverous reaction in it, although it would have taken a lot longer to strangle him. I think the fact that it's a sort of in-death kick is pretty horrid. That's a good shot in the mirror, seeing Joe in the window. That's very good. Oh yes, this is pretty grim. Yes, meat's very expensive. I shall feed you to my circus animals. Yes, Bobby, we're being very nice about the circus. We just suggest that they feed people to their animals. But yes, Christopher Burgess, who we saw before, had agreed to do my podcast, Who's Round. He was a resident at Charterhouse, which is a retired person's home that also has Robert Aldous, who's in the Dalek Invasion of Earth in it, and Richard Franklin, and Christopher Burgess was poorly. He'd got dementia and emphysema and all sorts, but he actually agreed via Robert Aldous to do my Who's Round, and it was the summer, and I'd got my kids, and I was going through a divorce, so when I had the kids, I really had to be there for them, and but I really wanted to interview Christopher Burgess because he wasn't on any of the DVDs, and he's really good in this. He's really good in Planet of the Spiders, and he's good in Enemy of the World. And he was also in Joss's Giants. I was delighted because I think I just got this on video when Joss's Giants was on, and I liked Christopher Burgess. Then I watched Joss's Giants, and it was like the Barry Letts rep, because Jenny McCracken, who's in Carnival of Monsters, who I think was considered for Joe, who Barry Letts used a lot, and Christopher Burgess were the sort of two second-string adults in it. And Christopher Burgess, in that point later in his career, played sort of slightly dowdy, sort of becardiganed, sort of slightly shabby older men. And then, so I'd really wanted to interview him, and he'd agreed, much to Robert Aldous's surprise, because he was so poorly. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll arrange it with the sister, because he was in the hospital ward. When I've got the kids back to their mum in a couple of weeks, and we can do it. And then sadly, I got an email from Robert saying that Christopher had passed away, which was a shame. A friend ddid visit him at his home a decade or so earlier and had a bit of a chat to him. Now, I think, do you see... Yeah, yes, blood. You don't see blood in Doctor Who very often. More often than you see 5 elephants, but still, nonetheless, blood is... That's the sort of thing that as a kid I'd go, I see Doctor Who's a programme for grown-ups, because I was desperate for it to be a programme for grown-ups. So poor old Professor Phillips, but that's a very Doctor Who thing, isn't it? You appealing to the humanity latent in somebody that is being made to do evil things. But yeah, this is the friendly circus folk being portrayed as bat-wielding thugs. But again, I'd love to see more of that, of sort of psycho clowns. I'd love it if the story had more, baseball bat-wielding clowns doing the Doctor a mischief. I think that's great. Yes, more of that, please. I always think that Terry Walsh is one of the policemen. I always think he looks a little bit like Michael Caine. And in fact, I think I met Terry Walsh once, and I think he said he was Michael Caine's official stuntman. I'm sure he said that. I think he said it. He was talking to somebody else. He said, "Well, I'm now Michael Caine's official stuntman." and I can see there is a sort of similarity in the look. Bit of CSO there, which is very popular around this time. I do like the dematerialization circuit as well. There's something rather comforting about that. I'd like to see a bit more of the dematerialization circuit. It's just a nifty prop, I think. That's all that Benton does in this episode, this scene, isn't it? Oh no, no. He's in the beginning. He's in the opening scenes. But I think there's one episode where Benton's only in one scene of this, and we have to watch out for where Nicholas Courtney isn't actually Nicholas Courtney as well. But again, yes, Autons being policemen. This is a terrifying idea. Again, it was one of those things you read about, going, God, this must be the stuff of nightmares. But I always think the mask looks slightly like it's got drawn on eyebrows. So he looks a bit. I think he does look a bit like Michael Caine when he turns around there. And now he looks like a mask. That's actually not as bad as I was anticipating, because I remember going, oh, come on. And I quite like the new Auton faces. I think I prefer the ones in Spearhead, even though those ones are actually a better idea. You can't, they haven't got gaps for the actors to breathe through and the actors to see through, which is pretty obviously why the eyes and the mouth are there in the Spearhead Autons. But I think overall as a look, I prefer the Spearhead Autons. But that sort of blankness again has the potential to be very disturbing if you want it to be. Oh my goodness, I've just realised I've got to the end of the episode, and have I got a favourite thing? Oh gosh, there I am going, I nearly interviewed that actor. I didn't say it like that, but you know what I mean. Now, what is my favourite thing about episode 2 of... Oh, all right, yes. And because it kind of ties in with a little bit that I liked in episode 1, and it's only a tiny moment, but I think... and because I'm not going to be wild about Barry Letts's direction, because I think it is a bit more straightforward than that of a Camfield or a Michael Ferguson, or a Derek Martinez, who are the directors who I think really shine during this period of the show. I'm going to choose so I don't think Richard Marson will choose this, but you never know, and I'm not going to play silly sausages and try and second guess, because that way always, it's like when you do a pub quiz and you go, oh, is this a trick question? And they go, no, it was just the question. So I'm choosing Farrell Senior's kicking death feet. That's what I'm going to choose. So now I'm going to nip to the future to speak to Richard Marson and see whether he has also chosen, and I get extra points if he chooses that exact sequence of words, Farrell Senior's kicking death feet, because it's grim, isn't it? It's grim and it's effective, simple but effective, and also doesn't show anything, yet suggests something grimmer by so doing. Okay, let's nip to the future. Well, let's go on to episode 2. I have written, but I guess as an intro to episode 2, just because there were a couple of questions that I had, if you've got the time, from your introduction. In terms of writing for magazines now, Doctor Who magazine, which I do, I sit on my sofa, I check the internet, I type things up, I file my copy by pressing send. How did you physically do it? What were you working on? And if you made a mistake, did you have to sort of start again? And did you have to sort of post with deadlines in mind and things like that?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is actually for the time, it was very well paid. And I say that because it's actually, if you look at it, I think journalism has got steadily paid less and less well, to the extent that now people expect it to be free largely. So I was lucky that even though you couldn't say that Marvel Comics were up there with, I don't know, the Sunday Times, they were paying a decent rate for what you did. And that meant I could invest in some actual kit. And in those days, the state-of-the-art thing was an Amstrad twin disk drive word processor, which I spent what seemed like a fortune on and did most of my work on. And this thing used to emit very strange and peculiar noises. It was sort of like, it was almost as though you were cooking the words. You'd type them in, and then you'd hear this kind of, you know, and hopefully the thing would save. But I do have various hideous memories of typing up stuff and getting to kind of 2 o'clock in the morning, and then the whole thing crashing, and you would just completely lose 3,000 words in one fell swoop. And it was expected to be delivered the next day. I would go to Prontoprint in Durham, where I was at university, and it would be faxed, because that's how state of the art it was. I would fax through my copy that I printed out on my crappy Amstrad printer, which also used to go and I would get people knocking on my door, Toby, because I had a television and a video, and I had this Amstrad, and they were all kind of in the early to mid 80s, quite science fiction in themselves. So people would knock on my door from other colleges in the uni and say, "Excuse me, I hope you don't mind, but I've heard you've got this, you know, computer. Can I have a look at it?" And it was always generally the boffins from the sort of science colleges. So, you know, I hope I was kind and didn't say, you know, "Take your BO out of my bedroom." But you know, that was it. I had this amazing technology, but it was sometimes not so amazing. And I can remember literally weeping at the thought that I've now got to redo the whole thing. Otherwise, it's not going to make it to Marvel in time.
Oh, my goodness. Well, we say that as I'm recording this on Zoom, and if anything goes wrong, that's all gone as well. So we're always prone to the same terrors of modern technology losing our stuff. Well, look. I have chosen my thing from episode 2. In episode 1, I managed to choose the one thing you didn't like about the episode. So let's see if we're a bit more in accord. What is your favourite thing from episode 2 of Terror of the Autons, please, Richard?
Okay, so I have gone, there's a moment with a chair. So the moment when the chair eats poor old Rex Farrell's business colleague. I think he's supposed to be a business colleague of his dad, and he comes in and you know, there's this whole kind of scene where you see Roger Delgado at his finest, and he commands this skeptical bloke to take a seat in this novelty chair, which were very popular at the time, and my father had something not dissimilar, which added to the terror of then seeing this thing smother the poor man inside it. And you know, it was so of the time. You know, Robert Holmes obviously had great fun riffing off every contemporary use of plastic. I think Doomwatch had done a plastic related story too. So there was, you know, it was obviously in the ether somehow, but it was really horrifying. I mean, if you know, even watching it now and even noticing that I think they did it in reverse. So it's a video disc effect, and you can see the actors having to help it along a bit. Even without that, something, because of the memory of it, I find it terrifying to watch now. And of course, there is the brilliant sub James Bond line at the end where they ask for his cards and they say, "He just slipped away," yes. Which is fantastic for a children's program. Very callous.
Well, we're on similar lines here, not quite, although we're both reveling in death. I went for Farrell Senior's kicking death feet, because I find the way that they depict the death of Rex Farrell's dad when he gets strangled by the doll, instead of seeing him get strangled, you just see his feet sort of kicking. And that's quite un-Doctor Who. That's quite sort of, it's minimalist, and yet because it's minimalist, it's actually even more horrible than if we'd seen it. It is a story of inventive death, isn't it?
It's quite, what's extraordinary about it now, looking back, is, you know, I had a lot of dealings with Barry Letts back in the day. And, you know, as a man, I mean, he was just the most lovely man. I mean, kind, generous, thoughtful, no pushover. I mean, he could be tough, and he could certainly do his job as a producer. He was a seasoned BBC pragmatic producer. So I don't think he wouldn't take pity on someone and say, "Oh, I'll keep a rubbish lighting director because I'm a nice man. I think he had high standards. But then to watch him do a program like this, knowing how, I mean, I think he thought of it as a mistake, actually, because he was directing the show as well as producing it. And I think you can tell he very much had his director's hat on, not his producer's hat. So a lot of the decisions about what they showed, and that's a really good example. I'm not even sure you'd show that now. Certainly years later, I remember we did a Blue Peter with a lot of clips from Doctor Who, and we got into real trouble because some of those clips were seen as really unacceptable for tea time. And I got out of it in the end when I was hauled over the coals by saying, but these things were shown at 5 o'clock, albeit in 1977 or 71 or whatever. And in the end, they had to go, oh, yes, well, okay, But in fact, standards had shifted, and actually Terror of the Autons, as you rightly say, is a kind of smorgasbord of death and horror, and and it's all done with a kind of relish.
Well, but talking about that, I mean, it's interesting how I remember, when I was young, a knife was seen as a sort of fairly low-key weapon. A death by knife you could sort of have in a film or a show, whereas guns, because they blew things to bits, were a bit more sanitized in a way. But a knife through the chops or in the back, or was a sort of acceptable form of dispatch in a children's show. Knives now you wouldn't let anywhere near anything that teenagers are watching.
Absolutely
right.
Well, it's interesting. In schools, most schools have the zero, even for a toy knife. So, I think that has culturally become a no-go area.
Yeah. Welcome back. It's episode 3 of Terror of the Autons. So I would like you, if you would, to press play in 3, 2, 1, now. I'm watching the BBC DVD, so I'm quite enjoying watching this in colour. As I said, I have seen it before in colour, but I think, as I say, I was used to it in black and white. I then had a very ropey video quite late on, I think, of it in colour that I'm not sure I really watched that much. And then obviously got the DVD. And that was the beautiful thing about the DVDs, is that they actually opened up a lot of stories that you want to previously seen, and then just that little sort of nudge up in quality suddenly of picture suddenly can make things seems more enjoyable. Certainly a few of the Hartnells I know I got a greater appreciation of because I could sort of see them, which helps. It's amazing considering that no actual proper colour print of this exists, how they've managed to get the off-air colour and meld it with the film print. I think it looks very, very good. And I remember this being the sort of thing I wanted more of, because this was quite a mythical aspect of this story as well, was that there was the famous story of Terry Walsh falling down the hill, which we will see. And you get the handguns, which I love. The idea that the Autons had... I remember I wrote some sort of fan fiction where an action on Auton would reveal itself not by having its hand drop like that, but by actually blowing its own sort of hand off, the first time it revealed itself to be a bad guy. Actually, the idea of it shooting its own fingers to bits to kill you the first time. But again, anything that takes something ordinary, like a hand, and turns it into, oh my god, a lethal weapon, a hidden death, is a fantastic idea. And yeah, we're in a quarry. Quarries look great. They're great for action sequences. They look good. You can control what you're up to. Oh, and there's a unit soldier there. Yes, I think he's not long for this world. He's like the equivalent of a red shirt in Star Trek. We never see the Brigadier having to write those letters, do we? To go, I'm afraid. It's like, it was always good in Spooks, wasn't it, when somebody died and they had to have a sort of, oh, there we go. Oh, look at that. That's great. Boom. Look at that. That's great. That's what unit stories are all about. It's terribly bloodthirsty, isn't it? But yeah, in Spooks, they'd always have this sort of the funerals or whatever, saying, Martin worked in the civil service, and their parents would never know that actually they'd been real heroes. I'm sure with unit soldiers it was the same. It was like, I'm afraid he died in a training exercise. But there isn't anything of him because he's been disintegrated. I'm sure the Autons disintegrated people in Spearhead from Space, didn't they? But I like the sort of puffs. That's a brilliant. So that's a great stunt, which I know is not all of it's entirely deliberate. And the fact that he gets up again straight away and starts climbing back is terrific. I love that. I like this whole sequence. Because, a monster being indestructible is a great thing. A monster that is disguised as a policeman is a great thing. This is all very Doctor Who, and you can so more of that. But I think I wanted more of that. So I'm very happy so far about that sequence and its execution, because Terry Walsh wasn't supposed to, I believe, fall that far. Or I think he was hit by the car when he shouldn't have been, and was sort of sent flying over, but the cameras were still rolling. So that was the story that abounded at the time. It was one of the early Doctor Who anecdotes. There were a few like that where they're like part of the furniture, because those were the stories that were told about particular stories. And Terror of the Autons, questions in the House of Lords, and Terry Walsh getting accidentally knocked all the way down the hill. But it's the fact that he gets up and starts walking back. And I do like the Doctor is a bit of a hypocrite, but I do quite like the fact he hasn't got he's got absolutely no time for chatting about the plan. It's just like, yes, it's obvious. And I have to say, I have a lot of sympathy. The Doctor's the sort of guy that would get the flat pack from IKEA and go, I'm not looking at the bit of paper that says how to do it. I know how to do it. And then would be furious 3 hours later. And I like the dynamic between the Brigadier and the Doctor. I know in a grown-up program there would be less of a twinkle, but it is a program that we fall in love with as kids. A certain sort of coziness is nice, and I love the fact that we know and love the Brigadier and Nicholas Courtney. And when I was younger, having a military figure like the Brigadier was so tough, and he seemed so right, and I think actually a lot of the sort of twinkly stuff didn't quite register as much because they were all grown-ups, and seemed so sort of grown up and official. So actually, it didn't undermine it at all. And it's only as you get a bit older and you realise there's a sort of rapport there. and these two work together so brilliant. It is partially because Pertwee works quite well when he's being really patronising, but she takes it, and she's I don't think she's diminished by it, because because she is capable in her own way, and she sort of lets it sort of wash over her a little bit. He is a bit of a git to her at times and it is sometimes unpleasant, but I think as a general thing, their dynamic is rather delightful, and it suits both characters quite well. And this is a very, very John Pertwee is Doctor Who moment. Walking out, slightly furious. I love the fact that he just kicked the TARDIS door. And I like this. That is terrifying. I'm a kicker of inanimate objects, and it's the worst thing you can do, especially because I'm a treader on rakes. I've done it more often than I'd like to think. But then, of course, you've got this. Yeah. Oh, the Doctor's amused by the fact he's just stranded a merciless alien psychopath on the planet. Beautiful. Now, daffodils, I didn't realise this, were given away with plastic, with washing powder. So this was a thing. Plastic daffodils, and of course, when a thing is a new thing, you go, what more could you want? A daffodil that will never die. I've got 200 bulbs in the corridor that need to be planted, and they will die unless I plant them. So I should really be doing that instead of doing a Doctor Who podcast. These are great. I think again, I wasn't wild about them when I was younger, but now I really like them because I get the contrast between what they represent, the oversized, over smiley, gaudily coloured. They're sort of like malevolent yellowcoats, aren't they? It's sort of like Heidi High with Botox. And what lies beneath, the blank-faced automatons, the blank-faced, lacking in individuality, lacking in features, cold. And I think that's another great understanding from Robert Holmes of what Doctor Who does well. Have these gaudy flower vendors, in sunshine yellow, that actually are the murderers. He's the alien killers. He's for somebody that worried about his abilities as a dramatic actor. John Pertwee's very good at being testy and furious and no nonsense. He was known as a comic and a voice man, a comedy voice man, and he's he's got a dramatic urgency about him that fits him like a glove. I hope he wasn't, and I believe he could be quite difficult, and that was probably bred from his insecurity, which is a shame. I don't like the idea that he's insecure, because he shouldn't be, because he's very good. But it's easy to underestimate sometimes how even the most confident, dashing, elegant-looking performer can be a bag of nerves. So remember that when you tweet somebody who you think's got it made, and say something mean to them. They might be dying inside. Brown Rose. Dermot Toohey. Brown Rose, of course, is a joke, because the name Brown Rose sounds a bit like brown nose, because he is a sort of civil servant-y type that this era has great disdain for, which I think is a great British tradition of being run by the civil service and not approving of them. And this is the Doctor, isn't it? Using that sort of unpleasant hierarchy to his advantage, and this can be seen as reflecting badly on the Third Doctor, and I think I have read it like that, of the Doctor being this sort of clubbable guy who uses his influence to push around a junior civil servant. But I think Brown Rose is supposed to be a bit of a Burke, and the Doctor's using the weapons of the establishments against the establishment itself, even if that weapon is a sort of bit of name dropping and pushing about a pen pusher. But yeah, Brown Nose is a good joke. He gets top billing this episode, knocks Michael Wisher down the credits. Poor old Mrs. Farrell. You're not going to be able to make yourself a cup of tea, love. Your kitchen's made of CSO. But this is an ordinary family setup. This is the sort of world that the Pertwee era look to sort of ruffle the feathers of and upset. But yeah, is the Third Doctor an establishment figure? He sort of has his cake and eats it, really. He certainly looks fantastic, doesn't he, in his frilly shirt and his cape. If you can wear a frilly shirt and a cape and get away with it, I think Larry Turner does say that in that 30 Years in the TARDIS documentary, doesn't she? And it's actually quite right that not many people can get away with that sort of outfit. But Pertwee is so incredible looking. Now, Norman Stanley here, playing the telephone operator who's checked out by Mike Yates, was cast quite late because this was going to be Hayden Jones, who is also the voice of the Autons and who also the voice of Joe Grundy in The Archers for a bit, until he died and was taken over by Edward Kelsey, also a servant to Doctor Who. But Hayden Jones got cast in The Mind of Evil as Lenny Vosper, a better part than this, one of the inmates of the prison and thugs. And so, even though Michael Wisher had been in it only a couple of stories ago, there was a season break. So instead, Norman Stanley is cast quite late as the telephone operator, and it's his last job. He was dead a couple of years later, died in 1973, this is 1971. So we don't know. I don't know much about Norman Stanley at all, apart from that. Cast quite late in the day, and was dead before I was born, bless him. But is the second person to play the Master, because he is the telephone engineer, is the Master, showing that the Master's art of disguise is pretty phenomenal and takes in a body shape as well as excellently fitting latex mask until the moment it has to be taken off. Then it comes off like a doddle. John away. I like the way she says "taken John away." She just falters slightly. Oh, poor old Mrs. Farrell, Barbara Leake. It is pretty grotesque, isn't it? I like the fact that Doctor has a sort of lab in a castle. Unit HQ is never is it ever a castle again? I don't know. So yeah, the series of inventive deaths shows a gleefully sort of morbid imagination from Robert Holmes, who, lest we forget, is only 4 stories in. He's sort of found his feet with the Crotons and the Space Pirates, neither of which you would call typical Robert Holmes. Spearhead from Space is slightly different because it's all made on film, so it's difficult to account for. It's something of an anomaly. It's something of a one-off Spearhead, just because of the way that it looks and what it represents, and it's setting up a new Doctor. But this is I think the first, for which it must be celebrated, the first flourishing of the sort of Robert Holmes successfully marrying his sense of humour, I think, because the Space Pirates is funny-ish. And it certainly has funny intent in places with Milo Clancy. But where his sense of humour combines with his storytelling, and he goes, well, why don't I have fun with the way that I kill people? Why don't I create a character like McDermott just to kill him off? Okay, I've got a killer chair. No, that's not very efficient, so then we'll have a killer doll. Oh no, that's not efficient either. Then we'll have a killer telephone. And you can tell he's having a great time. So all of those ideas, I think, are pretty fantastic. No, they haven't got a sliding whatever it is, molecular analyzer in stock. And the Brigadier very much takes it in his stride. Their relationship is already pretty well established, which is very nice. But he's been tetchy with both Yates and Benton in this story. Oh, yes. Oh, so Yates and Joe are going to make cocoa in the Doctor's lab, which is... yeah. No, actually, I like that Auton mask. It works slightly better from a distance, actually. I'm the Master. There we go. That works. That's fine. I always think that the long way about making a cup of cocoa because he uses a Bunsen burner and an uncovered beaker full of water. You want to cover that to make it boil, or just use a kettle. But I suppose I am in a house with all mod cons in 2020, and that perhaps it was perfectly normal to boil water on top of a Bunsen burner. They are in a lab. So, here they are in the Doctor and the Breeder on location in the factory, which... is this where Joe's on the phone to Mr. Campbell, the Dolly Scotsman? One of the great unseen characters in Doctor Who. You can, I'll sort that wee lassie out with a whatever it is. You're a Dolly Scotsman, Mr. Campbell. And she is. You'd do anything for her. She is so charming. Joe is lovely, and she has all the qualities for a Doctor Who companion. Actually, she's capable, but she's also scatty and prone to get in trouble. That's a very Doctor Who image. A soldier with two mugs, thing of cocoa, and a gun in his hand, shooting a doll to bits. Yeah, okay, I'll take that. I'll take that. That's Doctor Who. Is this going to be my favourite bit of the episode? I do like this bit. Coming up when... I would like more Autons, I think. I do like the Autons. And we still haven't seen an awful lot of them, have we? But I suppose there's not an awful lot they can do. I mean, at least they talk in it. They don't talk in Spearhead. Are they actually better when they don't talk? I don't know. They become perhaps a bit generic-y, monstery when they're chatting away. Go, Farrell, we are going away. Whereas actually when they're sort of silent and deadly at hiding in a safe. Are you just... I mean, obviously it's not... You just wait in the safe. If anybody opens it, just shoot them. Especially if it's a soldier in Wurzel Gummidge. I know he hasn't been Wurzel Gummidge yet. So yes, okay. That's a nice bit of detective work to get us to the next part of the story. Although you would want your villains to cover their tracks a bit, I think, in this day and age. But it does give us the opportunity for a bit of Holmes and Watsoning with the Doctor, and this rather glorious moment where the Doctor opens a safe and there's an Auton in it. Love that. That's just great. Yes, they are, Doctor. Remarkably persistent. And we're straight back to Unit HQ. That's very economic storytelling. Because there's cuts to this episode. Because Bill McGurk, I always thought Bill McGurk was the Auton policeman in the opening scenes on location, but he's not, because he's credited as fetch some cocoa, and he says fetch a tin of what? You were making cocoa in my lab. But Bill McGurk, who's in Enemy of the World, Barry Letts uses a lot of his actors a lot, which is very loyal. And unless you're not in one of his productions, then you go, it's an awful close shop that I can't get into. That is the truth of an actor's career. If you're in the shop, it's a lovely boutique that serves all the right people. If you're not in the shop, it's a bad shop that's locked and everyone in it's a git. But Bill McGurk, sadly, got into the shop, but then I can't... But everything he wanted to buy wasn't available. Bill McGurk filmed some scenes as a policeman who gets killed, who goes into the coach, has a bit of a chat with Farrell and the Autons and gets killed. And all of his scenes end up on the cutting room floor. So he's still credited, like Dave Carter in episode 1 of the Android Invasion. Dave Carter, who we saw in episode 1 of this. He's in episode 1 of the Android Invasion and is cut, but still gets a credit. There are a few others like that. I think Dean Hollingsworth is the bus conductor in one of the episodes of Greatest Show in the Galaxy. Anyway, again, it's me getting bothered about credits again. Not bothered, it's just they're people who are credited in an episode they are not in, which is what happens with Bill McGurk on this episode. Why do I care? Because I'm sure you don't. I can only apologise. I should have been going, look at that brilliant bit with the murderous telephone cable of death. And instead I'm going, well, actually, these closing credits have this rather... So, policeman Bill McGurk. He was sometimes, I think on Enemy of the World, he's credited as William McGurk. He did some stuff at the RSC as well. Anyway... Listen, you want me to choose something that I have... Sorry, I'm eating a bar. I've got to keep my strength up. Otherwise, how will I remember facts that nobody wants to hear? So, I have to choose for Richard Marson. For those who've forgotten or haven't listened to episodes 1 and 2, in which case, what are you doing? Well, I wanted to tune in to see if you'd talk about why Bill McGurk is credited. I'm going to choose the scene in the quarry, just because it was my standout moment of the whole story when I was younger, and it seemed to have everything: action, gunfire, a stunt, good location. And as I say, for a story that disappointed me a bit when I was a kid, that was sort of everything that I wanted the story to be. So, the scene in the quarry with the Auton policeman, including that wonderful stunt, even though some of it was a mistake from the mighty Terry Walsh. So I'm going to pop to the future to see what Richard Marson has to say, and to be honest with him about what I've chosen and see if we have chosen the same thing. I'm going to make a prediction. I wonder if he's going to choose the thing I nearly chose, which is the sort of garish daffodil men look of the Autons that hides, such blank evil beneath. I might hold that in reserve for episode 4. Who knows? Because I've gone for the quarry scene, but I wonder if Richard will choose that. Anyway, let's go and see what he says. Well, into episode 3. Well, in fact, before we do that, let's do another question. You say you met all these amazing people when you were working for Doctor Who magazine. Who made the biggest impression on you as a young man interviewing your heroes and the people that made your show?
Well, I'll cheat by giving you a kind of double answer. So one would be Barry Letts, because I was really amazed at the care he took. So if you did an interview with him, I did a whole John Pertwee winter special. And he was almost like the unpaid, unsung advisor. He would phone me up. He would send me notes. He read all the text. I was 18 or something and very green in a lot of ways. And I'm protected from that by not knowing how green I was. I just thought this is how things were, and that I could troll off to Television Centre or go to wherever and do these things and type it up and it'd all be fine. But I think he very sensitively would say, well, how about this? Or that's not quite right. And do it in a way that really empowered you. So I look back and I think that's what made him a special person. And that's what I think when you hear actors who can sometimes get a bit too lyrical, perhaps, that's what they owe to him, because he was a very enabling person. And I think he did that with someone. I was just a peripheral a fan who he didn't need to take anything like that bother with, but he did. And that has actually a memory that's sort of grown as time has gone on. And I've become obviously an old, I nearly said an old pro, has a double meaning. And I sometimes think that it's made me think how important it is to treat everybody that you deal with in a way that is compassionate, empathetic, and all the rest of it, without losing sight of what they're there to do. So he, as I say, he wasn't just buttering me up or making me feel good. He was trying to get me to improve what I was doing, so that presumably the text reflected the Pertwee era more accurately, and I didn't make howlers that he would be unhappy with. So it was a kind of win-win. The other person was John Nathan Turner, because John, who was an extraordinary character in so many ways, and could be so entertaining. He could be so lovely and so funny and friendly, but he could also be terrifying, and you would never know which John you'd get. So he would phone me up, or rather his secretary would phone up the payphone in the college where I lived, because that's how sophisticated it was. And I was usually asleep because I was a student doing plays all the time. So I was usually in bed at kind of 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, and someone bang on my door and say, "BBC's on the phone." And so I'd kind of drag myself round to where the payphone was, and it would be Sarah Lee, John's secretary, who'd be quite pissed off. And now, I used to think it was unreasonable. And now I think, of course she was pissed off, because I was, keeping her waiting. And she was probably thinking, this isn't high on my list of priorities, phoning through the news for Gallifrey Guardian. But she wouldn't do the actual content. She'd just be, he was very into the kind of image of being a producer. So it'd be like, "Oh, I've got John for you." So when I was there, she'd then put me through to John, and then there'd be a pause, and there'd be, "Hi, how are you?" And he'd always draw out the "Hi, how are you?" like kind of going off the end of a ski slope. And, and then you'd work out whether you got good John or bad John. And if you got good John, it would be lovely conversation. He'd be really helpful. And he'd say, "How about this?" or "How about..." But if you pissed him off, or he was in a bad mood, well, he wouldn't mince his words. And I remember he knew that he would get the paginations, like the plans for what we were working on, for 3 months ahead. And he saw this article that we were going to do about fantasy males and fantasy females. And he said to me, he said, "I'm not sure about this." He said, what exactly does it involve?" And so I chatted through what it was, waffling away, because I hadn't started thinking about it yet. It was a waffle article. And then he said, "Well, just keep it clean, okay?" And I just thought it was so funny, the idea that somehow I was going to write, kind of Jackie Collins meets Doctor Who for the magazine. But he was a really vivid person. And I part of the reason I was drawn to his story years later was what happened to him became almost like a metaphor for how the BBC and the industry changed. And we had certain similarities, because I obviously hit a cropper with Blue Peter towards the end of that time, and I felt a lot of empathy for what he went through, and in fact I think it killed him, and it didn't kill me, but I think he had a whole lot of kind of toxic things that went on, and he was terrifically brave, and never gave up, and he had that kind of show business, the shows go on spirit absolutely in his DNA. So it was those two men, I think.
Fantastic. That's really interesting insight. Thank you. So, episode 3, what have you chosen for episode 3, please, Richard?
Well, for me, the set piece that kicks episode 3 off, the first sequences, which involve action by Havoc. I mean, what thrilling words. I don't need to convince you, Toby, as we know you have form in this area. But, for a little boy, action by Havoc. And actually what action it is. I mean, I edge of the seat, behind the sofa, doesn't cover it. I found the opening of this, and I still feel it again. It's the ability to trigger it again. The whole of the sequence where the end of the cliffhanger of the previous episode is that they're being driven by Auton policemen, and then the beginning of this next episode is this whole thing in a quarry. Of course it's a quarry, where the Doctor and Joe have to kind of hide from the Auton policeman, and then the Brigadier turns up and rescues them. And it was so thrilling to me, that, and the famous stunt, which wasn't meant to be, where you'll be able to tell me which of them is Stuart Fell or Alan Chance or one of those guys.
It's Terry Walsh.
It's Terry Walsh. Well, there you go. Terry Walsh, who was, I think, the main man, really. Does this incredible fall, which wasn't meant to happen, and then gets up. And I mean, that was just a brilliant bit of the story. So for me, it's that it was so edge of the seat stuff.
Well, this could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship, because I've chosen the scene in the quarry. For the same, pretty much. I couldn't choose a single bit of it, because, like you, to me encapsulated everything. An extra gets killed. That's always exciting. A stunt happens. There's a quarry. The guns in the hands. All of that, all coming together in a bit that I found terribly exciting. So we're in accord there, Richard. Episode 3.
The only thing I just say, this is an example, where a little or a lot of knowledge is a dangerous thing. When I rewatch Doctor Who now, I make a kind of mental contract with myself to switch off all the stuff I know about the making of the show, because otherwise, for me now, I find that it's so distracting and so gets in the way. So as we're talking about that scene, I'm remembering Nick Courtney talking about how he hated guns and shooting guns and was scared of them. And he said, you can see whenever I have to shoot fire, do that, I'm flinching slightly. And so things like that would completely ruin my enjoyment. And I have to kind of not think of, or Katie's first trip is in fact caught on camera. I think you can see her stumble, and she was terrified she'd lose the job because she'd hurt her ankle. But all of that stuff is sort of, you don't really want that getting in the way. You want to reconnect with how you felt when you were watching these shows, just as a viewer and a fan, and just loving how the whole chemistry of it comes together.
Well, I've just called simply to say hello, Doctor. Let's not leave him hanging on the telephone for any longer than he needs to be. So we're going to fire up Terror of the Autons, episode 4, in 3, 2, 1, play. So yeah, the black and white print of this I saw was taped off air from Australia. And I got my early bootlegs. Don't arrest me. Is there a statute of limitations? They weren't available on video. I got them from a comic shop, now long closed down in Wolverhampton, called The Chase. The Place. There's a Freudian slip. It's named after a Doctor Who story. And you take in 2 videotapes, and you get one back with episodes on. So you paid in kind. You paid in videotapes. And I got mine from a cash and carry. They were called Yashima. And they were really cheap, and he much preferred it when I upgraded to Scotch, when it was revealed that Yashima weren't quite so good quality. But Terror of the Autons was the first Pertwee I got in black and white. It's again, this is something I'd imagined being sort of dark and terrifying, the strangling cableman. It is slightly more comical, isn't it, than I think I'd envisaged. But I think because if you'd done all of this without a twinkle and a sense of humour, Brigadier, but you see, is he joking? He's not joking. The Brigadier wasn't joking then. He played it dead straight, which Nicholas Courtney is very good at doing. But it means the joke. I don't know. But if it wasn't played with a twinkle, and if it wasn't slightly zany, it would be simply unsuitable for children. I mean, at the time, it was deemed unsuitable for children in many ways. Oh, I like that military policeman or whatever he is, his outfit. Totally forgotten about that guy. He looks good. I like his leather jerkin. No, it's not heat. You can actually see the heat on that. Because this was... And I remember Robert Holmes in his brilliant essay... Was it in his essay in the Doctor Who file, or was it on in one of the interviews he did with Doctor Who magazine, where he talked about talking to Ronnie Marsh, who was head of drama, and Ronnie Marsh saying, we had this clot. When he was being interviewed for the script editor's job, that's right, Robert Holmes' anecdote was, just going there to sort of dot the I's and cross the T's. And this Ronnie Marsh, head of drama, said, we had this idiot some years ago who wrote a story with killer daffodils and telephone wires, got questions asked, so don't do that sort of thing. And Robert Holmes, he does a thing saying, I put down some of Ronnie's horrible coffee. And it's weird because Ronnie Marsh was one of those names people thought, some sort of long dead BBC head honcho. But actually, we ended up interviewing Ronnie Marsh in one of our documentaries. Ed Stradling got hold of him, and we went and had a chat and had a lovely time with Ronnie and his wife Judy. His wife Judy was a PA on The Abominable Snowmen. So amazing, those sort of names that you thought were so unreachable. Ended up going, have a lovely time in their flat. I had to shoot off for a gig, so I didn't do the whole interview, but I got to spend some time, and the coffee was very nice, but it was BBC coffee in the Holmes anecdote. Now, I think Sergeant Benton wasn't in it last week, was he? I thought maybe he was just in one scene in episode 3, or was he? Was he actually not in it? I can't remember. Doesn't matter. You've seen it. Now they look very good in their outdoor fatigues. That's much better than the sort of beigey, slightly more formal battle dress of yesteryear. This is a really good look. Down and dirty, but yeah, you have your cake and eat it there, Doctor. I don't like the military. They blow things up. Brigadier, kindly blow this thing up. I'm the Doctor. I don't kill people. Brigadier, kindly kill this person. It's a brilliant storytelling device. It's a brilliant way of and it works here because of this sort of bristling mutual respect relationship they had. I don't know if we're supposed to find David Tennant's Doctor a hypocrite in the Sontaran strategy. The amount of times he tells Colonel Mace off for having guns and for doing military things, you go, yeah, but you're gonna let you need them to do it, so you could be at least a bit sort of I think that it's nothing wrong with the way that David Tennant's playing it. I think it's the way that it's played within the story. I don't think it. I think it may be deliberate to highlight the Doctor's hypocrisy. But here I think I think we can live with it without judging anybody. I just think the balance is right, is right here in this whole era, really. I like the moral stands the Doctor makes. I like the morality of the era of the producer who is conscious of ecology and is very much a liberal who's against pollution, who's about trying to do understanding between races and things like that, and yet it's the era that's where you're working with a military force. But there's an undercurrent there of saying, yeah, well, to actually stand for the things that you believe in, even if they're good and peaceful and decent, you might need to back those up with military force. And that, that's complicated for us. But the human race is always blowing things up for what it thinks is a good reason. It just depends whether you're the blower or the blowee, whether you like it or not. The spray of death, this was originally called, and of course that's the first bit of spraying that's happened. But what an ingenious! Now I imagined it just to be a little sort of film, it's a bit more of a thing, but it's an ingenious way of dispatching a human. Cut off there. That's a wonderful idea. And it's so macabre, and that idea, and I didn't know of the dying breath, and I had to sort of think about that, and then went, oh yeah, when you see people die on telly, they sort of go, so of course you get rid of the last thing that's in your lungs, and of course that dissolves it, so it takes away the evidence. What a glorious, grotesque, macabre, inventive mind Robert Holmes has. There's unit on a knoll in the studio looking at a coach on film, and that's just the sort of thing we have to get used to when watching 70s telly. This wasn't unique to Doctor Who. It was an aesthetic that you soon got used to. But I think it's the fact that the evidence is then disposed of. That's a nifty effect as well, of the dissolving plastic. Beautiful. So just a series of corpses by daffodils, no evidence, and it's an escalation of the Master's plans. Is this the first time? This is the first time they meet. Yes. Well, what a moment, and what a pair they are. I wonder who the Master's other opponents are. I wonder if there are various less influential time travellers that he goes and, lays traps for, or when he just kills them first go. And again, this I can see what critics of this era sort of say. Well, this cozy relationship between the two, but. And the last line was changed of the episode. He was supposed to say something like, "The Master's, I'll be fighting the Master until I kill him or he kills me." And it was Ronnie Marsh that said that's a bit too on the nose. So instead he says, "In fact, I'm rather looking forward to it." Which, of course, you go, well, you're looking forward to an encounter with someone whose presence is going to cause the death of many innocent people and whose aim is to destroy the world and kill everybody on it. Yet these stories are made by a generation of people who, for whom wartime was a not too distant memory, for whom war stories were common, and war service in the case of people like Pertwee and Barry Letts and Roger Delgado, and often when you read their stories, war was about a lot of boredom. And they yearned for action, not because they wanted to die or they wanted to kill anybody, but because it sort of got it over with, and because it broke the boredom, which sounds perverse, I'm sure, until you're in the situation where if you're gonna have it's like waking up from a nightmare, or pulling off the plaster. If it's gonna happen, it may as well happen now, and then the sooner it happens, the sooner it's over. And if it's over and I'm still here, the sooner I know I'm not gonna die today or whatever. So that idea of the sort of adrenaline kick of an encounter with a mortal enemy may seem a little cozily boy's own in its approach, but actually I think was more. I think something you could more psychologically buy into if you were from the early 1970s than perhaps me as a somebody that was born in 74, so a bit later. So yes, Rex Farrell's finally got his conscience, but Bessie looks great. I've never quite figured out why wheels look like they're going backwards when they're going forwards on telly. I'm sure somebody scientific will tell me. In fact, don't. I'm happy. I'm happy to live with the mystery, and I probably wouldn't understand what you said anyway. Oh yeah, so, and of course that's the Brigadier's solution is to blow things up. But he's not gonna. This is actually tense now, right? All the close-ups. Have they aborted in time? The stock footage arrives and goes overhead, and that was all done with the simplest of means. And I love the lighting in the coach, and those close-ups were great. That was a good moment. That was a really effective moment. I mean, you kind of know that, the bombs aren't going to drop, but they wrung all the tensance out that they could have done. And they're sort of filming everybody from below. It's hard to film in a coach. I like the Master's grudging respect for Farrell finally developing a backbone and standing up to him. Although it is a slightly odd characterisation with him because he was so sort of sarky at the death of McDermott and then snivelling, and then it's... Michael Wish is very good, but I don't think Rex Farrell's going to be high in anyone's sort of most memorable guest character list, which is a shame. But Michael Wisher will be praised many times in this podcast because he was terrific, and his Davros is one of the show's finest ever creations and performances. Oh, and Carnival of Monsters, when we get to that. Oh, I will be like a pig in the proverbial Morse code with a brake light. That is nicely sort of ingenious, Doctor Who-y, showing kids how you can do a clever thing, and I like that. That's a very Doctor Who-y way out of trouble. Very good, very good. So I'm pleased to say I've enjoyed this more than I expected. I still don't think it will ever be in my list of favourite stories, but the military stuff's all very good. I would like more Autons, but then again, perhaps that's the point. It tantalises you, because if they were just all over it, and this happens with Doctor Who a lot in the 70s, I used to think, well, if they've gone to the expense of making the monster, why can't we see a lot of it? But of course, this is made for a generation of people for whom things were held back in drama. I remember everyone talks about the Nigel Neal play Baby, don't they? And this one shot of actually quite an absurd looking thing, but because it's built up to, and because it's only on for a very short amount of time, everybody that watched it says, oh God, it was this most incredible thing, because their imagination did more than their visualization, because their imagination had been working for the majority of the screen time, and the visualization for much less. And actually, it's a lesson in that we do want everything. We always want the money shot, but the build up to it is actually where the excitement and the drama lies. That was a nice shot of the coach in the puddle. Film cameraman there has gone, Gov, why don't I do that and you do that? We've got a little Ford there in the road, so I'll give you some bumper. I don't know why I made the film cameraman a Cockney stuntman, but I did. Who was it? John Baker, I think. I don't know what he sounded like, so that was not a rendition of the actual John Baker. Now this is the sort of stuff I wanted. Fighting and action. Very good. Bit of a stunt there. Pertwee leaping out, and I think that's twice poor old Farrell's been knocked out with a blow to the back of the neck / back. Which is what I call the Mission Impossible maneuver, where you hit somebody between the shoulder blades to knock them out. It's too late. Yes, I always think the monsters shouldn't do contractions or abbreviations. I don't know why, because saying it is too late is a bit cliched. But, another unit soldier blowing up with smoke. Yeah, I loved all that stuff. Terrible bloodthirsty. Yes, this is cracking. Flying through the air. That's what we want. And this was the other anecdote. This was the Richard Franklin anecdote where he's got a bit later where he says, I had this close-up where I said, that's it, sir, we've got him now. And apparently the delivery was so bad that they didn't use the close-up. Roy Scammell! Lovely blonde-haired Roy Scammell, who is the fall guy. And look at that fall. That's a terrific stunt. Adds nothing to the story. Just some poor technician walking down the wrong gantry at the wrong time and hurled off. And, that's Barry Letts going, right, we're going to set it on Earth. We're going to make it look good. We're going to have stunts, hardware, and all those bits and bobs really do help. But this, yes, so this is where, and I remember watching this going on, and now we're going to see, hopefully they'll have learnt to make it better than the monster in Spearhead from Space, thought I. How will they do it? It's a blob of paint. But again, it's making you use your imagination. But my imagination had been helped along by the Target novel, which very much got the money shot splattered in front of the page in pen and ink. Look at that, brilliant! And this is I'd forgotten about that one as well. There's lots of. Is that Alan Chun's there? I think it was. Loads of unit soldiers getting killed. How delightful! This is the stuff. Death and destruction. But the fact it's being dispensed by, grotesque carnival masks in yellow blazers, gives it again a macabre juxtaposition of the sort of the jolly and the destructive. I mean, you could have rung the master at any point, Doctor, and gone, that they're not gonna, the Nestines aren't gonna. It's quite a. It's almost like this is about introducing the Master and the Doctor, and the Auton threat is sort of less important, and all it takes is for the Doctor to go, they're not gonna think much of you, Master, and the Master goes, I think you're right, Doctor. But I guess it's a bit like the anti-plastic in Rose. The story is more concerned with other things, so you go, we can dispense with that. I'm sympathetic to that, but I think, again, because this was a story that has always done very well. This is we've got him now. That's it. So we've got him now. Apparently, I think that was originally in Close Up, and or there was a version of that in Close Up, and Barry Letts wasn't hugely happy with it, and Richard Franklin told a self-deprecating story about his delivery of that line being a bit over the top and not going down well. And the other anecdote for this, and that's that photo of Roger Delgado with his hands in the air was used a lot. But there's the story Michael Wisher used to tell was that because this is spoiler alert, this is Rex Farrell. So for the shot we see that reveals that it's not the Master but Rex Farrell, whose body I think gets run over by the lorry by the coach, which is pretty bad. Because he'd been under the mask for quite a while, his face was completely white, so people worried that he'd actually died. Although he wasn't wearing the mask when he was shot. Anyway, it's a nice story. So they actually thought Michael Wisher might have been dead there, and he's dead with his eyes open, which is I always think is a grown up. I don't know why I think it's somehow, because it avoids the cliche. Look, Rex Farrell is definitely in the path. Oh no. Well, his body's around there somewhere. I sort of think Rex Farrell might get squashed there, which is pretty grim. Yeah, I like a death with eyes open. It just goes against what we're used to, so seems somehow more grotesque. And I don't know. Death is part and parcel of Doctor Who stories, isn't it? It's an exciting thing, which is terrible, really, if you think about what it is we're saying. Or perhaps I'm just opening a window into my psyche. You, Toby, obsessed with death with all your obituaries and Facebook posts about the latest character actor Cull from the Grim Reaper with his copy of Who's Who on television 1970, and so that he's scything through. I'm rather looking for... Oh, gosh, it ends actually very quickly. That's a very short coda. The story, you always think of the wind down as being a bit more laboured than that, but that was very, very quick right to the end. Well, look, I still think that story has shortcomings. I think I was saying I interrupted myself. I think because this is a story that is sort of designated a classic, or certainly was when I was growing up, and one of the best Pertwees. I don't think it is one of the best Pertwees, but I've certainly found plenty to accentuate the positive Oz. And I also think that perhaps some of my reticence about it is the gap between what I expected and what it was. And actually, what it is not a compromise. It is what it means to be. So it cannot be blamed for anything I might have imposed upon it before I had seen it. So in a way, perhaps anything that where it falls short for me is actually my fault and not its. And I found so much to recommend in that. I would happily sit and watch that and enjoy it. I think doing this has made me actually want to go back and watch it and shut up and enjoy it. And things like the banter with Rossini and little bits where I thought the scenes of people sitting around talking were a bit much. Were actually much more entertaining. I think if I see it as a sort of Robert Holmes story, I might, and the things that he became more of his trademark as he went on. I think I might receive it better. So I have to choose a thing from episode 4 and an overall thing. So the thing from episode 4 that I'm going to choose is I think, if not just the unit battle, but the look of the Autons, the fact that the Autons are these sort of carnival masked psychopathic alien yellowcoats. So I'll put alien yellowcoats. And you know, and the fact that they're fighting, you know, recognizable soldiers in military fatigues, that juxtaposition I think is very nice. So episode 4, alien yellowcoats. But episode 4 has reminded me of what I think is you know, the standout thing that covers the whole story. But it certainly comes into its own in episode 4, which I think, and I covered it when I talked in detail, I think, about the ingenuity of the plastic over the mouth and nose, and then the disintegration of it with the dying breath. I'm going to call that inventive death dispensing. Why not? Well, I've written it now. I'm committed. So, but you know, the fact that we have the chair and the troll doll and and even actually, I've just seen it on the DVD menu, the shrinking, which I know becomes a master trademark throughout, but it's seen here for the first time. But particular, I think, as evident as demonstrated by the plastic over the mouth that disappears, the inventive death dispensing, because it's also it shows us a sort of morbid sense of humour, which is sort of good fun, but also a really guilty pleasure when you start to think about what it is you find fun about it. And I quite like the fact that it plays with you like that. Is that I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the idea that you know, inventive death is something that piques my interest. But it's escapist drama, and you're allowed to press certain buttons when you're doing escapism that you perhaps don't in real life, and it's an outlet. So perhaps I'd be planning inventive death for people if I didn't get to scratch that itch watching Doctor Who. So in a way, we're all safer. Let's see what Richard Marson has chosen in the future. So, we get to the final episode and the bonus. How big a part does Doctor Who play in your life now, Richard?
Doctor Who for me in this year, it's quite been interesting because obviously it's been a very challenging year for everybody. For me now, it's very much a lovely way of accessing a bit of joy when I'm feeling down or when I'm feeling, you know, I just know there's certain things I can go to and put them on and it will make me feel a bit better, a bit happier. And in a way that's wonderfully uncomplicated, because I don't go away and think I want to read all about how it was made, or I want to examine it or explore it or debate. I actually loathe now any sort of pulling apart of the plot, because I just sort of think that's missing. It's not missing the point if that's your thing. And I've done it lots myself in the past. But Terror of the Autons as a story, for instance, does not in any way hold up to logical analysis, and it's kind of, but that's missing the point of what these were. They were like, you know, Saturday cliffhanging serials for a family to really enjoy for 20 months, and that's what I want to go back to, and so that's what it gives me now, and that's what I try to connect to. The only downside to that is it means that there are chunks of the program I kind of don't very often revisit because they're not the bits that spoke to me most, and then I feel like a bad fan and that I should be, you know, I should be challenging myself and really trying to get something out of Paradise Towers, which is maybe there that our mutual friend Chris Chapman, who adores it and will wax lyrical about it for hours, but I just can't get in there because my experience of it at the time coloured my view of it so badly. And, you know, I was so resentful at the time that what I thought was a good script had been so badly interpreted. I can't get past it. So you see, I want to now just go to the pure joy bringers like Terror of the Autons.
Well, I remember your review of Paradise Towers in Doctor Who magazine, quite an unprecedented drubbing. I see.
And I just say quickly, shout out to John Nathan Turner, who let us print that. Wow. Because, you know, that was a shift in I think he'd had such a battering himself, but actually it was very interesting that I remember the editor saying, I'll send it through, but I just don't think this is going to get past him. And I think he cut a couple of tiny things, but really that was very, very good for him.
Good for him, absolutely. Well, and look, you've sort of summed up very handily there what this podcast is about, because I sometimes go into social media to escape and just to sort of revel in the thing I like. And I see so many people yelling at each other about it. I'm trying with this
Yeah.
to, one of the reasons talking to people like yourself is because it's nice to hear what other people like about Doctor Who. But two, for me to go into a story with my eyes open, to like it for what it is rather than perhaps what my younger self would have wanted it to be. And it's been really educational, actually. And in this sort of time of schisms and darkness and locked doors, I've been really enjoying it, and I hope the listeners are too. So that brings us to episode 4 and the bonus thing. I've chosen, actually both of my things are sort of from episode 4, but one is all encompassing and maybe ties in with something you've already said, but we will see that. So what is your thing from episode 4 and your bonus piece of joy about Terror of the Autons?
Well, I feel like I owe this moment of episode 4 quite a lot, personally, professionally. It's the revelation of how the next part of the Nestine/master plot to ruin everything for humanity is using the daffodils, and they spit film over the nose and mouth. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to avoid spoilers, in which case I've spectacularly failed. But anyway, that moment, years later, decades later, I was working on Blue Peter, and we had a serial called The Quest, which was essentially a rip-off of Doctor Who with other telefantasy moments in it. And the presenters would all play parts. And we were doing one called Masters of Time. And the villainess was played by Jean Marsh. And Peter Purvis cropped up at some point. So there were a lot of nods and references. And the scripts came in, and there were various issues with some of them. And in one episode, they all finished on a cliffhanger. One of the episodes did not have, in my view, a convincing denouement. It didn't have a cliffhanger we could shoot. And I remember talking to the director and saying, you're not going to be able to achieve this, not in the time and the money. And even if we had pots of money, it's still really complex what had been written. And we needed something that would work quite quickly. And I remembered Terror of the Autons. And I said, have a bunch of flowers delivered to the character's dressing room door. And she takes a little sniff, and then out comes the plastic film over her nose. And we did the whole thing. I was amazed that no Doctor Who fans picked up on the completely shameless rip-off. But it got us out of a hole, and it was actually really quite easy to shoot and very effective. And, the Blue Peter audience loved it. So I was really glad. And that totally came from Terror of the Autons. So that's my moment from that episode.
Ah, brilliant. Well, that sort of ties in with one of mine. So give me your bonus one as well, and then I'll give you both of mine, because I think there is some sort of cross-fertilization. So yeah, your final...
I kind of dithered, Toby, about the bonus moment, because I sort of thought, really, the bonus moment, I should use this as an eloquent tribute to Roger Delgado, who was fantastic, and I loved him. But I kind of thought that's a bit entry level, maybe a bit obvious. You take he's so brilliant, you almost take for granted that he is the man he was. But for me, the image of the carnival masks that go on the Autons is one of the most terrifying. It's one of those things I had nightmares about. And again, it was so clever of Robert Holmes that he riffed off all these things. They were giving out plastic flowers in supermarkets in 1970, 71. And there were those carnival masks. They were probably the costume designer thinking, what can I do that's cheap and I can hire easily, that have a connection to plastic and blah, blah. But when I saw them, I just thought, what new horror, what fresh terror is this? And that image has stayed with me all these years and always will. I suspect if I'm unlucky enough to develop dementia, I will be babbling away in the care home about scary men in carnival masks, and they won't know what I'm talking about. But it was a very, very kind of scary image. So that's my bonus.
Like they play old. There's a beautiful thing on YouTube at the moment where they've showed an old ballerina, haven't they, or an old classical musician. They've played some of the music, and let's come back to it. So they might play you the Terror of the Autons soundtrack, and you'll point at the daffodil.
What a soundtrack. If I heard Deadly Dudley's riffs and synth sounds on that, I would be probably quite distressed, because it goes so well with the kind of, the macabre comic strip story. It's wonderful stuff.
It is. You're right. It's so easy for things like Dudley Simpson and Roger Delgado. We, as you say, it's we sort of take those for granted, but they definitely are worth saying. Well, look, this is very interesting. Having started Poles Apart, and I've never won this because the chances of me picking the same as somebody else are infinitely small. However, my thing for episode 4 was I don't know if you can read that, is Alien Yellowcoats, which is the big-headed Auton, which I think it's the contrast between the gaudy jollity out front and the sleek, blank, murderous Autons beneath. And my bonus thing, which I think ties in with your first thing, so I don't know, is I was making it up as I wrote it, but inventive death dispensing I've put, which ties in with particularly, I think, but it's the whole litany of them. It's the fact that he gradually gets more economical as he goes along. But I think the genius of the plastic thing that exploits our weakness, kills us very, very simply, and then hides all the evidence, is a sort of ingenious thing that I think as a kid just makes you go, how do they think of this stuff? So actually,
Absolutely.
Richard, I think for the first time, if I haven't won, did I get 3 out of the 5 that you did? I certainly think we can call it a score draw, which is as good as I've ever done, because I normally don't get anything.
Well done, Toby. Well done, Toby.
After such an appalling start where I picked the one thing you didn't like, I feel like I grew. I went on a journey. And we were finally.
You totally did, yeah.
Well, I'm so grateful to you, and that was really interesting.
Absolutely.
I think that's so much more interesting to do it where we sort of chat to each other. I would like you to take this opportunity to plug anything you've got to plug, or draw attention to your internet presence or anything, your books or anything that you want to plug. Please do.
Well, the only thing, I mean, I'm in charge of a show for CBBC called Our School, which has been running now, it's going to its 8th year. And it's really interesting to be making that show in the current climate. And going back to the kind of point of finding joy wherever you can find it sometimes in the way that children react and cope with these situations. So it's been amazing and a privilege, without being too lovey about it, to chart how ordinary kids in an ordinary Yorkshire school in the last year have been dealing with this very changed world, and dealing with it in a way that sometimes, just does bring a tear to your eye, because they're so fantastic and funny and warm. And we're carrying on. We go back to start shooting the next season in January, 22 more episodes for CBBC. And so, it may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I think it's always on iPlayer. So just an episode of Our School, that's what I'm very much preoccupied with at the moment. And I think it has a lot of heart and humanity, and is well worth 20 minutes of your time.
Brilliant. Well, we will direct them there. And thank you so much for that, Richard. I'm really grateful.
No, it was my pleasure. It was lovely to talk to you, Toby, and well done.
So, with immense gratitude to Richard, and also I'd like to acknowledge the fact that his was a name I read in Doctor Who magazine as a kid, and then he, of course, done good because he went on to be producer of Blue Peter. I can recommend his Blue Peter Diaries, very entertaining. But I know he was also very helpful on the John Nathan Turner documentary that Chris Chapman did, and of course Richard wrote that very good book about John Nathan Turner. So Richard's a very important contributor to Doctor Who, but when I was a lad, he was, one of the gatekeepers of the legend, and wrote up a lot of those interviews that I alluded to during my commentary there. So the fact that I think I've met him once. We've emailed a couple of times about a couple of things. He's been very helpful to me with my Quatermass book, and if he's got anything, he shares it. And he shared it with me, which is not always common in the world of Doctor Who or TV sci-fi writing. I've always found him extremely kind and cooperative. So I'm really glad that he's contributed to this, and this process is given credibility by his presence on it. So thanks to Richard. Thanks to you for listening. I hope you go away and dream up inventive ways to destroy the human race. If not, just have fun. And I'll see you on the next one of these. But that was Terror of the Autons, which I've come out of this process enjoying much more than I anticipated when I went into it. And that's the whole blooming point. Don't go changing. Ta-ta. Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places with me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, Richard Marson, who you can follow on Twitter at RichardMarson2. The music for this podcast was specially composed by Dave Gates, and the artwork was by Dylan Patterson. Thanks to this edition's featured patrons, who are Ruben Herfindahl, Rob Leonard, Stephen Moffat, Richard Straw, Pascal Zierka, Sydney Wilson, John Williams, Rich Wiggins, Kevin West, Peter Ware, Alistair Wallace, Gary Wales, John Turner, Sidney Trote, Paul Taylor-Greaves, Adam Stone, Dave Stevens, David Spencer, Richard Smith, Paul Shields, Jim Sangster, Tom Selinsky, and Gavin Rymel. If you'd like to join those names and become a patron, please do so at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. I will also take donations at kofi.com/Toby Hadoke if you'd just like to do the one-off thing. Anything, of course, is welcome, as is any review or positive rating you can give at any podcast outlet of your choice. It all helps, and I'm grateful for any of it. Next week, I'm going to squash your favourite Beatles because I'm taking you all on a chase.